Okay, we should be recording. So, let's see. Since the last video, this has been, today's ride will be ride 8, I think, since the last video. So, we got our first cool day, right on schedule, mid-October. And so last week, all I did with him, because we had a hot week and a lot of rain, without doing any groundwork, I rode him at the walk on the figure eights Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, we had gotten a bunch of reins, so all I could do was the long reins. And so we did long reins at the walk on small circles, and we did walking under saddle on figure eights, and got to where we could do some smaller figure eights. So today, because it was cool and he was fresh, we just did 10 minutes each way on the long reins at the trot. And even without working on trot this week, his trot's definitely better. So I'm going to try to stay over in a smaller area and start off this ride with the smaller figure eights that we've been working on. So I'm just basically tightening up the figure eights to keep the hind legs a little bit deeper underneath. I have to steer a little bit more with the reins. There's a tiny bit more neck bend on the tighter figure eights, but he seems pretty comfortable getting the hind leg a little more underneath him. And even though he's still pushing on the bit, still rooting the reins out, it's not as extreme, it's not as strong, it's not quite as violent, which is another way he tells me he's getting the hind legs underneath him to the point that he doesn't fall forward as much. The right turns are still a little sticky. He doesn't want to use his right hind quite as well. He rolls his back to the left when we track right, a little more than he does when we track left. So the first objective of these smaller turns, and again, I'm just staying on a figure eight so I'm not overworking one hock or the other. I just want to get him comfortable with more engagement and more stability. And the first objective is using the turn to get the hind leg to adduct a little bit deeper, which is a longer stride towards the center of the body, and keep his back level while we're turning, especially as the hind leg finds a little deeper placement. Then, as he gets better and better at that, I won't need the reins as much for steering, and I won't need as much neck bend. I'm still letting him choose his speed. The slowing down is part of him learning to engage and stabilize the hindquarters. If he halts, I give him a little bit of a leg aid. He's pretty good off the leg. I don't have to work to get him forward. But you can see how he struggles more on the tighter turns, and I need a light bend through the neck to get the turn. I'd rather have the neck straight on these tight turns, but this is what we've got for now. So I'm just going to show you, I'm going to use this, which is where we left off yesterday. I'm using the smaller figure eights now as the warm-up. I'm going to show you about 10 minutes of this, and then I'm going to begin figure eights, the same figure eight pattern, but we're going to add in some halt transitions, and hopefully that will help with the pulling and the falling forward. But first I want to get him comfortable left and right. Going to the right, still a little harder for him than going to the left. But he's doing pretty good. And so obviously I'm just letting him have his head. I'm not giving him any rein restriction. And he's not as adamant about pushing on the bit and pulling the reins, but it's still there. So we're going to work on, I thought he might have to go. So we're going to also introduce a couple of strategies to maybe discourage the falling forward and discourage some of the pushing on the bit without taking a rein contact yet. But there's two strategies I can play with after about 10 minutes of just letting him have his head, letting him warm up his hindquarters, letting him warm up his back. I don't care how much pulling he does right now. And after 10 minutes, I have two different strategies I might play with and show you. One strategy is when he pulls down, I can hold a little bit of rein resistance, but only on the inside rein, one at a time, and not both reins. And that way, if he pushes on the bit and gets a little resistance just on one rein, it doesn't make them push sideways or panic or resist like they can with resistance on two reins. The other strategy is going to be, if I take resistance on two reins, then I'm going to ask for a full halt, let the reins go, and go back to the walk. And I can time that to when he's falling forward, like right there. I could ask for a halt and hang on to both reins, but if I take resistance on both reins, the first thing I want it to mean to him is the feet need to slow down, and in this case, a full halt, to be clear, right? So again, both strategies are meant to, the pulling on the reins, the pushing on the bit is not happening in isolation. It's a direct result of the instability he feels through his hindquarters, the lack of engagement, the lack of stability through his back, the lack of lifting the back. So all of that, once he lengthens his neck, he doesn't really control his body weight. So he falls forward, pushes on the bit. That little extra push that he gives is showing me that it's kind of a habit for him as much as a dynamic falling forward. So this 10-minute warm-up is to get the back more stable, get the hind legs more engaged, get the hind legs more stable. And then I can sort of play with the habit of the pushing on the bit a little differently. And like I said, I don't usually worry about it until he can start to control his own body weight better through his back and hindquarter. It's hard to fully get rid of this habit. The root cause of it is just a lack of control over his own body weight. Good. So as he slows down to almost literally one step at a time, that's the beginning of him learning to use the braking mechanism, to use the hindquarter engagement in order to control his own body weight. So as he pushes forward, he has to equalize the resistance to forward in order to not let his body weight go catapulting to the front legs. So right now, the slower he chooses to go, the more he's actually figuring out how to use his hindquarter and back properly. And this is about the size of the figure eight where I don't completely lose forward, but small enough that it challenges him to offer me more engagement, puts the hind legs a little bit more towards the center of his body. And helps him learn to change and stabilize the rotation as well. Now give it a couple more minutes, letting him completely have his head. He can do whatever he wants with his head and neck. I'm just having to use the inside rein to make the turn. There, I don't know if he has to go. Or if he's resisting the right turn. So I just take my time, let him think his way through it. So I'm still getting most of the pushing on the bit when we track right compared to left, but he can do it both directions. So like I said, I'll give him a couple more minutes, and then I'll just play with both strategies and sort of see which one works a little better for him. I'll give each one about 5 minutes in order to decide which one I might do more of, if either one. I know it's windy and cool today. Yeah, I think it's resistance to the right turn. Interesting. So I want to be careful and make sure I'm not stressing the hock, but getting him to slowly recover the function of the hock. So I'm very generous with all of his errors. None of it is behavioral. This horse couldn't be trying any harder for me. It's all kind of related to him changing his coordination and relearning to use the hind legs. And I'm pretty happy with the amount of muscle he's starting to put on in the hindquarters. Spending a week at the walk and not trotting, I think, was very helpful for just sort of solidifying the coordination a little bit more, getting him more comfortable without stress or concussion. This week my plan is, because the weather is much cooler, do a 10-minute trot each way on the long reins, and then get on and ride for the 40 minutes. And that's what I started today. Okay, so that's about 10 minutes. The easiest way to discourage some of the rooting and the pulling is just to hold on a little bit to the inside rein. So instead of restricting him with 2 reins, what I'm going to do is when he roots, I'm just going to put a little bit of resistance on whatever the inside rein is. So he's going to feel a bit of a bump in his mouth, and we'll see what he thinks about that. But I'm still just on the first notch down from the buckle. I'm not really holding the rein all that short. I'm just not letting go when he roots his head down. I'm letting one rein go, but hanging on to the other. So he just gets a little bit of a bump when he roots down, but it's only on one side of the mouth. And it's much easier for us as riders to only hang on to one rein when they pull that hard and not hang on to 2. So now I'm going to switch hands because I need to go left. And it's not a lot of resistance, but even when I was letting go all the way to the buckle, he was pushing on the bit so hard he was still getting a little bit of a bump in the mouth. So there, I'm just holding the left rein. Then I'm going to switch and take the first or second notch on the inside rein. So when you can see how hard he's pulling, he still, even on one rein, pulls me a little bit forward. So all I'm doing when I take one rein is closing my fingers and keeping my elbow in. I missed that one. So it's not telling him he can't do it. It's just making it slightly more uncomfortable when he does do it. But again, I don't want him to feel like he can lean on the reins or even that he's restricted by the reins. So coming around to the right is where I get a much harder pull. And I'm just keeping my elbow in lightly and closing my fingers on the reins. Right, then switching reins, so this one is loose when I have the other one. And I need the inside rein for steering a little bit, so that's the one I'm hanging on to. So I'll give this a few more minutes. I'm just going to try 5 minutes of this and sort of gauge his response. And then what I'm going to do, which is a different strategy, is just start to put very frequent halts in our figure eight. So that can help reduce the pulling and the rooting, because I'm going to try to ask for halt before he falls forward and see if slowly coming to halt helps him figure out how to control his body weight a little bit better instead of just falling forward. Whoop, we got a couple of clunks through the shoulders. So things are changing. And as much as he's sort of struggled with the hocks and the hunter's bump and the weak hindquarters, building him up, he's been challenged, definitely challenged, but nothing that's really escalated his defensiveness. So lots of physical struggle, but he generally seems to enjoy the work, even though it's hard for him. So notice when I take the rein, I'm not giving, but I'm also not pulling. So my elbow's not coming behind my body. I'm just sort of taking up a little bit of rein to offer resistance to the pulling and get the direction without creating too much of a fuss. So that's about 5 minutes, and it's interesting, before the right turn now, several times, he's offered to halt. So I'm thinking that might be a little bit better strategy, is when I put resistance on 2 reins, what we're going to do is walk about 5 strides and then briefly halt. And then walk about 5 strides and then briefly halt. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and halt. Good boy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and halt. So where he sort of falls sideways and loses steering or pulls on one rein like he's doing now, that can be related to just a loss of balance. So the walk halt on the figure eight will either be harder for him, or he needs a little bit of a halt to kind of reorganize rather than fighting the guidance from my body and my reins. So like there, when he pushes on the bit, I'm just going to halt. So I'm staying on exactly the same pattern. I'm just putting in halt more frequently. And if he, like there, is starting off with pushing, I'm going to put the halt in more often, and then the leg aid, and then the halt, and loosen up those reins in between the halt. So when there's pressure on the bit, I want the feet to stop. If there's pressure on one rein, the saddle turns that direction. So if there's pressure on the right rein, the saddle goes right. If there's pressure on the left rein, the saddle goes left. If there's pressure on two reins, the saddle stops briefly. Then when I give a leg aid, the saddle moves forward. Right? So being very clear and breaking it down, the transitions challenge the balance. The upward and the downward transitions are where you're making the braking and the pushing mechanisms work the most. So the transitions are much harder work than just sort of staying in any particular gait. So if he gets more defensive by using the halt transitions, then I know I can just work with resistance on one rein at a time. He might choose to halt, which is great. I'll take it as a gift. But if he doesn't choose to halt, I won't ask. So again, I'm just going to give this about 5 minutes and sort of see what he has to say about it. And again, if he's doing that, especially at halt, I'm not making a big deal out of it, right? But I'm going to halt more frequently. So during every halt, he should have a chance to feel stable and then have another try at going forward. And the right turns are still tricky. So he seems to be not really more resistant, but he's tossing his head a little more, and he's falling a little more side to side. So at this point, I'm not exactly sure which one worked better. I'm thinking resistance on one rein at a time probably works better. So I'm going to go back to doing that. If he stops, that's on him, not me. So I'm just going to give him a couple of laps without any rein resistance other than for steering. I'm going to let him root to his little heart's content. And not just like my warm-up, I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm still working with the hindquarters, the figure eight, and the levelness of the back. And sometimes there's just nothing you can do to discourage that rooting. So I will play with it, but if I feel like it's making him worse and he's better if I do nothing, then I'll return to doing nothing and let him build up some more stability through his back and hindquarter before I try any rein resistance again. Sometimes that's the best thing you can do, is nothing. Okay, so once we come back around this turn, I'll try a little bit of rein resistance on the inside rein, but not much. I'm not going far from the buckle. And like I said, if he stops, that's his choice. I just let him do it and then give him leg. So as we come around the right turn, if he roots, he's going to pull on the right rein a little. I need just a touch with the left rein so we don't turn more to the right. Then I'm going to switch hands. And keep my hand on the left rein. So if he pulls or roots, he gets a little bump on the left side of his mouth, but not the right. So it doesn't make him stop the rooting. All it does is make it a little more uncomfortable when he chooses to do it. Great. Then I'm going to switch hands. He's not too keen on these right turns. I know. They're difficult. Especially when I sit in the way. Then a little bit of left rein so he doesn't keep going right. I know that change of direction is tricky. Yeah, so especially if he's going slow and he offers to halt. Anytime he offers to halt, I'm slow with the leg aid to let him go to ask for forward. So I'm not making him hold the walk. He likes to stop right here before the right turn, like that. So I wait with my leg. I give a little resistance on the right rein. Now I'm giving leg. But again, I'm waiting for him to find forward because he's changing his coordination, learning to get that right hind leg working again. So if I don't criticize him for exploring, he will explore more, and ultimately he has to figure out what's more comfortable. And getting back to good mechanical coordination, I have to be careful in the process that I don't make things worse or create pain issues while he's restoring something that should make his movement more comfortable and much easier. Okay, so I'll do one more right turn. Again, he stops. That time he didn't pull hard on the right rein before he left. Now he's pulling hard. So I wait and give leg and let him figure out how to get around that right turn. Very good. Then I'm going to ask for a halt because I think that's a long enough video for this update. So I'm going to continue riding him at least another 15 minutes, I think, for an hour worth of work today. And that will be the program, I think, this week. So when I give you the next update, I'll do an update on the trot work, especially if it's still on the ground, and give you another update on the riding. And hopefully he's rooting less and less next time I do a video.